last hour or so, President Trump really took aim at supporters who criticized his administration's handling of the Epstein investigation. We're talking in a blistering social media post. How's our audio? Are we good? Okay. He called the outcry over the Justice Department's decision not to release additional files on Epstein a, quote, Democrat-led scam. He also used the word hoax. And Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who is a Republican critic of Mr. Trump, is trying to force a House vote on whether the administration should release the files. So that's where things stand right now. And there's a whole lot more, Greg, to talk about with this case.
There is. And, you know, the question remains, and it's getting asked more frequently every day. The temperature is going up. Where is the Jeffrey Epstein client list? Why can't we see the Epstein client list? Why did the Attorney General of the United States say the client list is on my desk and then, oops, it's not?
Speaking of that, let's hear her say those very words.
Let's do it.
This is Pam Bondi.
I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file along with the JFK, MLK files as well. That's what I meant by that.
So she's saying she was essentially taken out of context.
Well, it sounds like Alice in Wonderland when she went down the hole and was talking to the Mad Hatter, and she said, I can't understand a thing you say. And he said, it's Jabberwocky, my dear.
And
everything, words say what I mean. And I think that's on both sides of the aisle. When you look at the unicorn called the Epstein files, everybody points fingers at the other side for cover-ups, for spinning. It's just remarkable. But at the end of the day, and this is how it started, why there's so much traction. There is layers of mystery upon mystery. Just a little anecdote about about Epstein. And in terms of looking at this from a legal perspective or an analysis. So if you're in a criminal case, and there's been a lot of criminal cases involving Epstein's conduct. In 2008, there was an investigation in the Southern District of Florida. That's now become part of the Ghislaine Maxwell appeal after her conviction.
Because she said that she signed a plea that would allow her to avoid prosecution.
But there should be, at the heart of this was enticing and soliciting underage children to engage in sex trafficking, sex acts with Epstein. And when you start peeling back the layers, first of all, what do we know about Jeffrey Epstein? Not the myth, the legend, the unicorn. What do we know? We know he taught at the Dalton School in New York, was relieved of his teaching duties after it was determined he did not graduate from college, then immediately went to Bear Stearns. Then his wealth is unexplained. This individual went from a school teacher to having the largest home in Manhattan, residence, houses in New Mexico, in Florida, a private island in the Virgin Islands, and no one can point to a hedge fund that he controlled. No one can point to people that say, I'm his biggest donor. So you know, everything about this is a conspiracy, but at the heart of it was 100 or more victims. And they were enticed, they were seduced and taken on trips by Ghislaine Maxwell.
Shopping, movies, it all speaks to
their
grooming.
Education, grooming, and under the guise of I have a benefactor and he likes massages. It's innocent fun, and it transitioned from innocent fun to sessions with actually sex toys were introduced. Here we go again, another high-profile case that has a lot of salacious, unpalatable things that are exhibits in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. So for those of you who don't know or forgotten, she was his maybe
Paramour?
Paramour.
At one time?
They lived together for years. She was the daughter of a prominent socialite in Britain. But she would actually engage in enticing these 14-year-olds. And just slightly older to engage in these sex acts.
And she was convicted of several counts of sex trafficking and all of that, and sentenced to 20 years in prison, a huge fine, I think 5 years probation once that happened. So let's talk about the legal aspect of her case. She's wanting to appeal to the Supreme Court. Hey, let me have another chance.
Let's do. And she was arrested in 2019, as was Epstein. Now, he had previously been prosecuted in the Southern District of New York in 2007 and 2008. Central to that, he entered a plea agreement that said if he followed the terms of the agreement, neither he nor his co-conspirators could be charged with the conduct which was very similar to the conduct in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And the plea agreement specifically named 4 individuals, but she wasn't one of them. But notwithstanding that fact, there was a trial with Maxwell in 2021. It lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution called 4 witnesses. The defense called 9. And a lot of evidence was introduced that you think would include a, quote, client list. But I've got some theories about that.
All right, share
stay
your
tuned.
theories.
But after the 4-week trial, she was convicted. And a lot of the similar crimes, federal crimes that Sean P. Diddy Combs was convicted of, enticing people, transporting people to engage in sex acts, soliciting minors to engage in sex acts. But when you look at the evidence, and I've actually looked at some of the flight logs. So it's the same private pilot, a person named Rogers, on each of the logs. Sometimes there's initials, there's information.
We have some of those. Let's show
see
you
if we
here.
can.
They're all heavily redacted. And what about the release of these? Because even though they are heavily redacted, and let's talk about why they are, because say you have an Epstein versus a, I don't know, Taylor Swift. She doesn't want people to know. She doesn't want people to see her flight logs and where her plane is going.
Well, that's an interesting issue because the law changed in 2024. There was the FAA privacy amendment to the FAA regs, specifically for people like Taylor Swift, that permitted owners of private planes and travelers to block the release of their private information. But back to my theory about this client list that's continuing as we speak a few hours ago to cause the President of the United States, to cause our Congressman Tim Burchett to want to hear from Ghislaine Maxwell at a committee. I don't think, there's 2 significant things. I don't think that he kept a, quote, client list, who's been naughty, who's been nice. Bill Clinton came here to have sex with his 14-year-old, whatever. But I think when you look at the flight logs, the manifests, I think when you look at information, and this is interesting because Alan Dershowitz, who represented Epstein for a while, echoed this sentiment. FBI memorandums are called 302s. Sometimes they're entered into evidence, sometimes they're not. In the 302, it typically contains information that's relevant. What Dershowitz has said is that the 302s contained information about identities and people that were clients. So is it a client list? No. But,
or is it just information on people attending some of his several parties, along with others who had nothing to do with this other?
We don't know because they won't release it.
Exactly.
So when the Attorney General said she had the file, now, when you say you got that file, the Martin Luther King file, the John F. Kennedy file, she must have a pretty dadgum big desk, because when I have a trial file...
It's not even that high.
They don't even
We're talking years and
fit
years
on my
and
desk.
years.
I mean, you would have to, it would fill this newsroom, I would gather to say, with documents. But what you could do, and that's interesting if you look, I don't know if that's showing up on the screen.
We can pull it back up here.
How redacted some of that information is that have
almost
been
all of it
released
is.
through public records that we talked about last week. So
we do see some names here, but that's the contact list. So that could be like the equivalent of the little black book, if you will.
right, but if I was the most powerful, if I was the Attorney General of the most powerful nation in the world, and I thought individuals were engaged in sex trafficking, no matter if they're high profile, low profile, no profile, I think I would interview the pilot who flew people to the private island, to New Mexico, to Florida. I think I would also, look and release the FBI 302s after I redacted child pornography, and then I would have an arm's length investigation. So my theory is there a client list that says, client list, a little black book? Absolutely not. Is there readily attainable, accessible information that came out in the Maxwell trial that's on Pam Bondi's desk in FBI 302s? Yes.
And what do you do with that information? What should be the next legal step here?
Well, you do what Tim Burch is doing, asking Ghislaine Maxwell to testify before a congressional committee.
Let's listen to this interview with Congressman Burchett.
I'd just like to see the files turned over. As far as the list, I think Ms. Bondi misspoke. I don't know a lot of criminals, but the ones that I've studied usually don't keep a list around. So I would suspect that there's some trouble with the flight logs, because obviously somebody flies on this plane doesn't mean that they're a pedophile or doing anything illegal. It's what rich people do.
There you go, Congressman Burchett.
And my good friend, Mr. Burchett, if you have to listen to what he says carefully, he says he did not know a lot of criminals.
A lot of criminals.
Didn't say he didn't know criminals.
And most criminals he knows of don't keep a list.
Don't keep a list. But even, someone, the view from Google Earth, like Congressman Burchett, he's asking the questions from the outside looking in, knowing that there should be answers. Looking at it from the inside out, someone that has reviewed hundreds of FBI 302s, been in a courtroom, seen sex trafficking cases, tried sex trafficking cases, this information is always there. So at the end of the day, whether it's a political football, whether it's Biden's fault, Obama's fault, Trump's fault, Bondi's fault, you have 100 victims that have been molested.
And that's what people need to remember. I think there's this huge fixation in the public. We want to know who these people are. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we want to know who these people are, not because of the salacious intent allegedly among high-profile people, but of the victims that they left behind.
The question you need to ask yourself, and it's the royal you, is not, is there a client list or information? But why do you want to know? And it's not to embarrass, shame, or humiliate. It's to prosecute people that broke the law for
Bring
abusing
justice.
and trafficking and enticing minors, because it was an ultra-sophisticated grooming enterprise run by Ghislaine Maxwell. Hundreds. And these girls started as young as 14 years old.
Yeah.
But, why is no one from the Department of Justice interviewing the pilot? If they did, again, the records I reviewed showed one pilot. Where is that 302, the memorandum of investigation?
Does it make sense to you that there was just one pilot, given the supposition of what was going on? You don't want a cadre of pilots.
Well, conjecture, speculation, and theories can get you everywhere. And I think that's an indicia of, you want your circle tight when you're conducting a criminal enterprise, and it would be plausible that that's why you would only use one pilot. But where is that pilot? Why has no one?
Where is that pilot?
But again, in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, 4 weeks, 24 witnesses from the prosecution, 4 victims were called. 9 witnesses on behalf of the defense, but still, at the end of the day, it raises more questions than answers. And it's interesting, and she is before the U.S. Supreme Court saying that she should not have been prosecuted in the Eastern District of New York because of the plea agreement Epstein entered in 2008 in the Southern District of Florida.
Was he doing that to try to protect her, or did she step up and her attorney said, "Hey, let's include her in the protection"?
Very odd. It's a a plea agreement that was designed to protect not only your client but others.
What does that say? And why did this case not go further in 2008?
Those are some of the questions that people want to ask. But, you know, it's interesting, her appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court is not an appeal that she was innocent, that she didn't engage in the conduct, that she didn't entice minors to engage in sex trafficking. It's simply, I was part of a list to get immunity. And typically there's a quid pro quo, and I'm kind of scratching my head in 2008, what did the government get for giving Jeffrey Epstein a pass?
Exactly.
So
It's a decade.
A decade.
More than a decade before his arrest and subsequent suicide. And here we are, like I said, 6 years later, public fixated on this list or no list that could implicate prominent members of society or not. But people want to talk about that. Let's talk about the legal steps to get to this list, if it exists, or just
the legal steps. And we talked about, you know, the federally it would be a Freedom of Information Act, and you could, for example, do that, pose a request, which is typically done online, to the FAA. And
you can do that as well. The public can do that.
They can, but one of the exceptions is there a matter of national security interest? Is there confidential informants? Is there ongoing criminal investigations?
Are victims' names on this list as well? You've got to protect them.
So those things all factor in and weigh in the decision. But I think if people would quit using the L word, and that is list, and start saying, we want information on who traveled to Fantasy Island with Epstein, on the logs, you know, on all of this. And, you know, with all the civil lawsuits, and maybe it happened and maybe it has slipped through the media's attention, I'm curious as to whether the pilot was ever interviewed, ever asked to give his deposition. If anyone ever tried to explain the initials that are on those flight manifests, if anyone ever tried to pull up footage from where people got into the plane.
I think you need to be on this case, Greg.
We have plenty of cases.
You are busy.
Just sit behind Bondi's desk and figure out who killed Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and where the client list is, and it would be
we'd all be a lot happier knowing
happier.
What's going on. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue this thought, and we're also going to bring you up to date, if you're just joining us, on what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein. The controversy continues. Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're with us. There's a difference between flight logs and
manifest,
and then files that have been publicly released in the Maxwell case back when she was convicted. So let's take a look at what we have right now, because those are not redacted.
This is interesting because this is, if I was trying to create or compile a client list of people that were involved in sex trafficking, this is one of the flight manifests. And if you see the name and the pilot's name and signature appears on most of the ones that were introduced at Maxwell's trial, and it appears to be, it's not as legible there, but David Rogers, if you'll notice on most of these. And when you look to the far right, and if we could scroll back up, Ms. Hope, our lovely producer, see you see initials, you see things in a column, but there's no context. But obviously this was significant in the Maxwell trial because this was Exhibit 662-RR, and it was introduced by the United States in the prosecution of the case.
So they're trying to link A, B, C, D, E.
Right.
Flights, dates.
And if you would go back, Hope, can you go back to the redacted document that we had up before the break that said victims...
That it is.
Visitors. Now,
Visitors.
If you think
Massage.
you can't, you don't have to be a Scooby-Doo detective or Sherlock Holmes, because that document protected to protect potential victims, which I understand.
Yeah.
But visitors massage, So, and the whole crux and thrust of the conspiracy was enticing underage girls to be groomed to start with massage and then engage in sex. And if you've got a list of the visitors and their massage, one would think that would lead to information that would comprise a client list or a list of people that was potentially involved in sex trafficking, enticing young girls, etc. And this is why this is so frustrating. And it's not a political issue because that document says visitors massage. If you go back to the flight list.
And there is a list.
And there's a list, but it's been redacted. If you go back to the flight manifest, look at all of that information in all those flights, and there has got to be FBI 302s. That's the fancy name of a memorandum from a case agent that interviewed these people, talked to these people, because how do we know this was Exhibit 66-R in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial? So you've got initials, you've got identifiers, and you've got the same pilot, Daniel Rogers, over and over and over.
Daniel or David? I think it's David. Or is it Daniel? It's hard to tell from here. In any event, the same pilot is the point.
My point is, back to a statement that Alan Dershowitz, that was attributed to him, that there was no client list, but there was individuals identified in FBI 302s, other evidence and other exhibits. And I think we're seeing this firsthand, and I think that's why you have the public outcry and firestorm, because we all know that you can't just have this ongoing criminal enterprise with complete anonymity. Look at the Sean Diddy Combs case where you had footage in this. You had people like Lady Gaga. You had supermodels. You had all those people. You had Justin Bieber. You know, all those getting caught up and released in the evidence and the video footage. But for some reason, again, the unicorn, that's the mythical creature called an Epstein file, nothing ever sticks.
Well, this guy wasn't an entertainer. Would there be well, I guess there could be a reason to have famous people at your parties because you're famous for being famous.
Well, you're famous for being a high school teacher.
Who's all of a sudden so wealthy, you can afford just about anything. You've got this now former disgraced socialite who's with you kind of running things. We have about 5 minutes to go. For those of you just joining us, because I know people come in and out, let's go ahead and bring you the story, kind of laying out the facts right now, and then we will talk more about what could happen next legally.
The Trump administration has dealt with this story for more than a week now. It's about Jeffrey Epstein, the wealthy, well-connected New York financier who was charged with sex trafficking. His 2019 suicide led to allegations of a cover-up that have continued for years after his death.
I don't understand what the interest or what the fascination is. I really don't.
President Donald Trump has battled back criticism about his administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case ever since last week, when the Department of Justice said it didn't find an Epstein client list or evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals. The memo says no further disclosure of information about the case would be appropriate or warranted. But on Tuesday, President Trump had this message for Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release.
Bondi, at a fentanyl press conference on Tuesday, wouldn't answer questions about the case.
Nothing about Epstein. I'm not going to talk about Epstein.
She's faced criticism from Democrats and some Republicans, including Congressman Tim Burchett.
Do you support Bondi as the Attorney General?
I'm not a fan. Not a fan. I'd just like to see the files turned over.
And Speaker Mike Johnson told conservative commentator Benny Johnson Bondi needs to explain her statements about the Epstein case, adding we should put everything out there and let the people decide. Democrats also weighed in on the controversy.
We need transparency and accountability, and we need it now.
That Tennessee congressman you heard from, Tim Burchett, has called on the House Oversight Committee to subpoena Ghislaine Maxwell. She's serving a prison sentence right now for helping Jeffrey Epstein traffic teenage girls. She's also Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend. In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlot. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Vinay, for that story. So that kind of brings you up to date on everything. The pressure is building on the administration to make sure that there is transparency here. I don't think that this is not going away.
This isn't going away, and at the heart of it is there are people that have not been held accountable potentially for engaging in sex trafficking with incredibly young girls. And you know, when with the president, again, this is crosses party lines when you see the speaker and you see Congressman Burchett calling for transparency and a release. But you know, why it means something is because there's video footage of President Trump and Epstein. There's video footage of President Clinton and Epstein. There are a lot of powerful, connected people that were connected to Epstein.
Prince Andrew as
Prince
well.
Andrew.
And let me bring this up because we haven't really talked about Virginia Giuffre, and she is one of the earliest and most prominent accusers and really helped get the ball rolling here on this case. She filed several lawsuits alleging sex trafficking and abuse in the late 2000s. She did not testify at the Maxwell trial. She has since taken her own life. So you've got to think about the victims here.
And the way the prosecution's closing argument began in the Ghislaine Maxwell case was, let me tell you a story about a girl named Jane. And you know what's so powerful about that to me is it's not about the privileged. It's not about the uber wealth of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell grooming and enticing. Let me tell you the story about a girl named Jane. It's about those victims whose lives were shattered and ruined.
All right, let's talk more at 5:30.
Let's do.
Maybe we'll have more information on this case. In the meantime, thank you so much for being with us. Take care.